Welcome back. We saw how Poland fell in a matter of weeks back in September 1939. Now it's time to take a look at the next big step, the Battle of France, which didn't immediately follow. There were several reasons for this. The German army needed to rest and move to the French border, not to mention that a solid plan was needed before the actual invasion could be carried out. The original version of Case Yellow, the German attack plan, called for a repetition of the Schlieffen Plan, a massive attack through Belgium, after which the main German force would turn south and capture Paris. Hitler and Chief of Staff General Halder kept arguing about the document, of which several versions were proposed. The attack was postponed, while General von Manstein developed an alternative plan that would place the focus in the center. According to this, armored units would push through the Ardennes forest, a breakthrough would take place near Sedan, after which Allied forces up north could be encircled and trapped. It took until February to break High Command's resistance and finally present the idea to Hitler, who immediately accepted it. The Allies were preparing to counter an invasion up north, as they believed no strong forces could manage to cross the Ardennes with sufficient speed. The French army even held trials in 1938 to make sure this was the case, and they were satisfied with the results, claiming that the forest and the mountains were a natural defensive line. Consequently, they placed weak units behind this line. This was the decisive factor that determined the outcome. The German army was not in an excellent shape, especially compared to the French behemoth. French tanks were larger and better armored. They also had more vehicles, while only 10% of the German army was motorized. Training was inadequate in many cases. Discipline was also not perfect, but in some areas the German military was by far the best. Notable among these areas were tactics, which relied on mobility and speed, along with cooperation between different units. While German panzers did not provide sufficient firepower or adequate protection, their 5-man crews worked more efficiently, identifying targets and maneuvering around them more easily. They could also rely on the Luftwaffe, which was able to achieve air superiority, mainly because many Allied planes were already obsolete. When the battle started on the 9th of May, Luxembourg was occupied. Paratroopers landed at several Dutch and Belgian locations, surprising defenders and making it possible for Army Group B to quickly advance into both countries. After only 5 days and the bombing of Rotterdam, the Dutch army surrendered, while the Belgians had to retreat. The best French and British units immediately responded by advancing into Belgium, but the main thrust was not coming from there. Further south, at Hanut, the first major tank battle took place, in which the French managed to delay the German advance, but lost too many tanks and had to withdraw. The real problem, though, was even more to the south, where a massive force of German panzers and motorized infantry was trying to reach Sedan. The large number of vehicles caused a traffic jam, and while French reconnaissance correctly reported the long columns, these were not bombed. At Sedan, the Germans managed to punch a hole in the line with heavy Luftwaffe support, then advanced without their infantry. The Allied air forces attempted to blow up all bridges in the area, but they suffered massive casualties and didn't achieve anything. Expanding the German bridgehead at Sedan was necessary, but this required going against the cautious directives of High Command. General Guderian didn't want to wait for the slow infantry divisions. He employed what he called reconnaissance in force, but for 2 days a French counterattack by Second Army stopped the Germans. Some locations changed hands several times, but the French eventually ran out of tanks and reinforcements, after which German panzers and motorized infantry could advance westwards and follow the Somme Valley all the way to the English Channel, frightening both Allied and German commanders. Hitler himself was worried that the entire campaign would collapse due to the rapid advance and the vulnerability of the exposed flanks, while French and British leaders were stunned by the speed of the advance. After a brief pause, Guderian was allowed to move again. He proceeded to destroy several French formations, capturing Amiens and Abbeville, trapping large Allied armies, while the Luftwaffe, especially its dive bombers, would cover his flanks against Allied counterattacks. The new French commander, Maxime Weygand, proposed a new plan to cut the advancing German units with two simultaneous attacks, one from the north and one from the south. However, poor cooperation between the Allies and between their own units, coupled with more delays on the French side, essentially doomed the counterattack, which quickly fell apart and suffered huge losses due to German anti-tank fire and Luftwaffe bombardment. After that, it was all a matter of time. German armor captured Calais, while the British started organizing a massive evacuation, which would eventually result in the rescue of almost 340,000 Allied troops. This is famously depicted in the movie Dunkirk. The second phase of the campaign started on the 5th of June. The French army was now depleted, having lost its best divisions and most of the heavy equipment. It had no reserves left, the Air Force was beaten, while they also had to deal with large numbers of refugees that were pouring in from the northeast. It would take 3 days for the Germans to break through, but once it happened, there was nothing to stop them. The Luftwaffe prevented any counterattacks, the French had to retreat. Large cities fell one by one, Paris was captured on the 14th, the Maginot Line was encircled and forced to surrender. Italy also declared war on the Allies on the 10th of June, but this made little impact as its forces would be unable to break through in the Alps. Prime Minister Renaud resigned on the 16th. He was replaced by Marshal Pétain, who would establish a collaboration government in the town of Vichy. France asked for an armistice. It was signed on the 22nd of June at Compiègne, in the same railcar where Germany signed the previous armistice back in 1918. France was divided into an occupation zone with Paris and the important Atlantic seaports, and a so-called free zone under the control of the Vichy government. It could also keep all French colonies, which was a calculated move by Hitler to ensure French cooperation and prevent a British expansion into those regions. In the end, the German military managed to achieve the seemingly impossible in only 6 weeks, losing a mere 150,000 soldiers in the process. While they used modern tactics, proper communication and cooperation between the different branches and within smaller units, emphasizing speed and mobility, their opponent was relying on an outdated way of thinking that went back to the Great War. On the Allied side, radio as a form of communication was often shunned, orders were not distributed to the commanders who would participate in a certain attack, while tanks were distributed among infantry units and could not form a center of gravity. The air forces, after years of neglect and budgetary constraints, were just being expanded and modernized. Even if we take all this into consideration, we should not forget that Manstein's new plan encountered serious resistance in high command, and that local commanders like Guderian and Rommel had to disobey direct orders from their superiors to achieve these outstanding results. We get the feeling that not even the Germans were ready for such an outcome, which, by the way, also made it difficult for the anti-Nazi movement within the German army to proceed with more action against Hitler himself. This concludes my video on the Battle of France. I will continue with another episode soon, maybe regarding Italian participation and the North African campaign, I'm not sure yet. See you next time.